I'll do the reading. Verse 8, for we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble, which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which raised the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver, in whom we trust that he will yet deliver us. Yet also helping together by prayer for us, that the gift bestowed upon us by the means of many persons, thanks may be given by many on our behalf. Our Father and our God, we come at this hour of the evening to say thank you. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your loving kindness and your tender compassion. And we come at this hour just to say thank you and have mercy on those who are suffering and going through with the coronavirus. We lift up all those families who are going through other difficulties as well. And we pray that they will continue to just trust and depend on you. We pray for this church. We pray for this fellowship, all the churches that are opening your name throughout the country and the world. These and all blessings in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you. Comfort in trouble. Comfort in trouble. We've been talking about this letter Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. And during the week, one of the questions that came to me was, Reverend, why do bad things happen to good people? And of course, if you go search bookstores, shelves, you could find different books that are talking about the subject about why good things happen to, bad things happen to good people. But just to, without reading all those books and getting all that information, you could narrow it down to this. Bad things happen to good people because of sin. Yeah, we live in a sin-sick world, and I know that's not a too adequate answer for you at this time, but that's basically the bottom line. But bad things do happen to good people. I could put it another way. Bad things happen to God's people. Yeah, now not only do bad things happen to good people, but bad things happen to God's people. And let me take that even a little further. God allows bad things to happen to his people. And I know we all ask the question, why? And I did come up with a few things as to why, from searching the scripture, why does God allow bad things to happen to God's people? Number one, if you're taking notes, and I pray you are, God allowed bad things to happen to his people, number one, to test the validity of your faith. You've heard me preach time and time again, a faith that can't be tested, sure enough can't be trusted. And so God allows bad things to happen to his children so that he could test the validity of their faith. And that is to say, because he has to make sure that you are trusted in him. A fellow by the name of Job, we remember him. He was tested way beyond. All his children was killed, everything he owned. He was a wealthy man. But Job said the Lord gave and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so one of the things that God is doing in the midst of this trial is he's testing our faith. And you say, well, why does he want to do that? No, not for his sake, but it's for your sake. Yeah, because you would want to know if you have the faith to hold on until the end. And so this is only a test. It's a test of your faith. Secondly, God allows bad things to happen to his people to wean them off the world. Yeah, to break our attachment to the world. We have all these worldly attachment, we sometimes tend to trust more in the worldly stuff than we do the divine stuff. And so God is testing us to see and to wean us off these worldly things. Trials will do that for you. Yeah, they will wean you away from worldly stuff. Thirdly, the Lord allows bad things to happen to his people to call us to a heavenly hope. Yeah, to call us to a heavenly hope. He wants us to be filled with the anticipation of the glories that are to come. Romans, Paul says, tribulation brings perseverance, and perseverance brings the character, and the character brings hope, and our hope will never disappoint. You never want to be disappointed in life. I mean, if you never really want to be disappointed in life, then live in the hope of heaven. And no matter how bad it gets down here, you can't be disappointed because you're not putting your stock in stuff that's down here. And so that's the way to never be disappointed. And so trials will do that. Trials will do that. You can say with Paul, like he said later on in this chapter 4, chapter of 2 Corinthians, he said, we don't lose hope. We don't lose heart. Even though our outer man is decaying, the inner man is renewed day by day. And so our momentary light affliction is producing for us a greater, far more eternal weight. And so verse 18 says, we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. So we live in light of heaven. And so first they test our faith, then they wean us from worldly things, and then they attach us to heaven. Fourthly, the Lord allows bad things to happen to good people to show us what we really love. Yeah, to show us what we really love. And that's a part of our sanctification. You see, trials will reveal what is most precious to you. I mean, if your bank account is most precious, then when the stock market goes up or down, and then you're going to be in depression all the time. It all depends on what you love the most. If you love your possessions the most, then you lose your job, or you can't pay your rent, then you're going to be in despair. And so trials come to find out what you really love, because where your heart is. Yeah, so trials, extremities, difficulties, they will always reveal what you love the most. Fifthly, God allows trials to teach us obedience. Yeah, trials teach us obedience, because most of the trials that come, they come because God is chastening us for sin. And so trials are God's chastening. He does that because he loves us. And so every son he loves, he chastens in order that he might bring that son to holiness and righteousness. Number 6, God allows bad things to happen to his people in order that he might reveal his compassion in our misery. Yeah, he allows bad things to happen to good people in order that he might reveal his compassion in our misery. God is ever and always concerned to manifest himself. It is God's desire that we understand who he is, that we understand his nature, and that we see his nature displayed to us. And if God is a God of compassion, if he's a God of mercy, and if he's a God of grace, and he's a God of pity, if he's the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, as verse 3 in our chapter tells us, then he needs an opportunity to demonstrate that. So no calamity, no comfort, no loss, no need for loving kindness, no pain, no need for pity. Matter of fact, you got to go through some stuff in order to know who he really is. That's what Job said. Job said, I've heard of you with the hearing of my ear. Now my eye sees you. Number 7, God does allow bad things to happen to his people to develop their spiritual strength for greater usefulness. Yeah, he He's developing your spiritual strength so that he can use you. You have to be a tested person and to be really effective in ministry. The more you are tested, the more you are refined by the trials and the trouble, the more useful you can become. James says, what, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Why? Because the testing of your faith is going to produce some endurance. And let endurance have its perfect what? That you may be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. The Lord is going to use these trials to make us perfect, mature, complete, lacking nothing, and to make us the strongest Christians we could possibly be. Greater usefulness comes through the path of suffering. Greater usefulness comes through the path of suffering. Number 8, the Lord allowed bad things to happen to his people to enable them to help others in their trials. To enable them to help others in their trials. One of the reasons that I have difficulty is so God can come to me in my difficulty and strengthen me, and then I can come to you with the strength he's given me. That's what we talked about last week. That's what Paul said back in verse 4, 5, and 6, where he says, who comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort which we ourselves are comforted by God. And so what the Lord is doing, he's allowing these trials in our life, and then he's pouring comfort on top of these trials to strengthen us to do the very same thing for somebody else. And so with all of that, there's one yet further purpose for pain. One further reason for trouble. And that's the focal point of our text tonight. It is this, that God allows his people to experience trouble and trials in order to display his awesome power. Yeah, God allows his people to experience trouble and trials in order to display his awesome power. Look at our text again, verse 8. For we do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction, which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even life. Even we had the sentence of death within ourselves, in order that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a peril of death, and will deliver us. He on whom we have set our hope, and he will yet deliver us. You also joining and helping us through your prayers, that thanks may be given by many persons on our behalf for the favor bestowed upon us through the prayers of many. And so, first of all, what we've been looking at for the last couple of weeks, we saw the promise of comfort. Yeah, that was in verse 4, how the God of all comfort comforts us in our affliction. And then we saw the purpose of comfort, also in verse 4, in order that we might be able to comfort others. And then we saw the parameters of comfort in verse 5. The comfort of God extends as far as we are suffering for Christ's sake. Yeah, that's the boundaries. You're not suffering for any foolishness. This is suffering for Christ's sake. And then we saw in verses 6 and 7 the partnership of comfort. And that's how it's mutual comfort going back and forth between other believers in other churches. It's a wonderful sharing, as he uses that word several times in verses 7. So we saw we have the promise, we have the purpose, we saw the parameters, and the partnership. We've already talked about the last couple of weeks. And so in coming to verse 8, we're going to look at the power of comfort, the power of it, to show how powerful God's comforting word can be. Paul speaks very personally of a situation in his life that was the worst life-threatening experience he's ever had. Stay with me right there. Paul is now talking about a serious personal situation in his life that was the worst life-threatening experience he's ever had. And I'm pretty sure that most of us who are going through this pandemic right now, we are facing the worst life-threatening experience that we have ever had. And so in verse 8 he says, listen, we don't want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction, which came to us at Asia. Now, beloved, we don't know what this was. I would love to know what the affliction was, but everybody was aware of it. They may not have had the right information about it, but everybody was pretty much aware of it. They were not ignorant of what was happening. They were ignorant of its severity. That's pretty much what's going on. We're not ignorant of what's happening. I think we're ignorant of the severity of what's going on. So that's what he tells them in verse 8. We don't want you to be unaware, brethren, of the affliction which came to us in Asia. Not what it was, but we were burdened excessively beyond our strength, so that we despaired even life. I would love to know what it was, but Paul said, listen, I don't want you to be ignorant. And so he didn't want his people not to have adequate information. And I know there's a lot of information going out there right now about the virus. Please don't be ignorant about the information that you are receiving. Make sure you're getting the correct information. And so he says, whatever was going on, it was so deadly, it was so overpowering, it was a form of persecution that they had no escape. He says, we were burdened excessively. That's what he says. He said, we were burdened excessively, which means they were unbearably crushed to the point of depression. He says, beyond our strength in verse 8. In other words, it was so terrible that there was no possibility of human survival. Please hear me. Whatever it was Paul was going through, it was so terrible there was no possibility of human survival. Whatever was going on, this was too much for him. And at the end of verse 8, he says, we despair even of life. We lost the battle. The will to live is gone. That word despair, very interesting Greek word. We won't get into the Greek, but it's a word from which we get the word passage. And what it's basically saying, we had no passage. We had no exit. Are y'all hear me? We despaired. We found no way out. And literally the total absence of an exit. There was no escape hatch. There was no way out of this thing. It was over. Paul, mentally, he was done. Physically, he was overwhelmed. No hope for life at all. This was it. And I'm afraid some folk are experiencing that right now. They're ready to give up. They don't think they have a way out. If they find no way out, there's no exit. We don't have no vaccine. We don't have no treatment. We just no hope for life at all. We are in some very dire circumstances. Look at verse 9. He says, look at the text. He said, indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. He said, we put it in our own mind. Plural. He said us, which means some other folk with him. Again, you're not going through anything by yourself. He says he passed the death sentence on himself. That was it. It's done. And whatever it was frightening to him at the time. And if you're honest with yourself, this virus is frightening to us at this time. And so he says, we have the sentence of death in ourselves. And it is a technical term for passing the official resolution. It's a legal term for passing the official death sentence. He says, I passed the official death sentence on myself. He got to that point where he says, I already know this is the end. And in verse 10, he says, watch this, in order that we should not trust ourselves. That was the purpose of God in it. In the middle of all of this agonizing pain, in the middle of all this physical, emotional, and mental stuff that we're going through, why is God putting us through all this? I've asked that question all through the week. Again, folk have been asking me questions all through the week. And the answer's right here in the scripture. I'll show it to you right here in the scripture. Why is God putting us through this? In order that we should not trust in ourselves. Hallelujah. God was taking them to the place where they had no escape, they had no human resource, and he said we couldn't call on nobody or nothing else but God. And that's just exactly where God wanted him. And I'm telling you, one of the greatest purpose in our trials is to take us to the limit where you realize you have no power to fix it. Yeah, God will send some situations, some trials, some tribulations in our life, and we could try to do the best we can. We can do all that we can, but there are some things God will send our way that only He can intervene in. And I love that in verse 9. He does it so that we cannot trust in ourselves, but in God. Why? Because He raises the dead. Yeah, that the only way out was going to be in the hands of God, because He's the only one who can raise the dead. Come on, it was gone that far. And that's exactly where the Lord wants to take us, to the place where you've done all that you can do. You have no more resources, no more money, no more friends. You're going down for the last time. God wants you to the place where He is the only one who could step in and come to the rescue. And that's the power we're talking about. Physical illness does not matter. Emotional distress does not matter. Financial death, being forsaken, left alone, being isolated, whatever shatters your confidence in your own ability, your own strength becomes your extremity, and that is God's opportunity. In verse 10, he says, God came riding to the rescue. He delivered us from so great a peril. And again, I wish I knew what it was, but all I need to know is that He was at the end rescued. He had endured a lot, and we're going to have to go through a lot in the midst of this pandemic. We're going to go through a lot, but God is going to come to our rescue. The Lord's power prevailed, and in the midst of that power, God will put Himself on display. The world will only be able to say that it was God who delivered us. And so we looked at the promise, we looked at the purpose, the parameters, the partnership, and the power. And now, briefly, just for a few more minutes, we're going to look at the perpetuity of comfort. The perpetuity means the continuance of it, the continuance of his power. And he simply says this, it's in verse 10, God delivered us from so great a peril of death, and will deliver us. See, the first one is the past. This is present. And at the end of the verse, and He will yet deliver us. That's the future. And so he says, God is going to do this right on out to the end, because it is He on whom we have set our hope. Well, God delivered us in the past. Most of us, again, can tell a story, can have witness, can give a testimony of how God delivered us in the past and how God brought us out in the past. But what about the present? He will deliver me, Paul says, in the present. But what about the future? He'll deliver me in the future. God will always be faithful, always. God says, I'll be there. I'll be there to comfort you, to strengthen you as the God of all comfort and the Father of all mercies, right on out until the end, until I take you into my kingdom at my appointed time. And so the last element of comfort that Paul talks about is the participation of comfort. The participation. And that's in verse 11. A magnificent statement. So he says, the Lord delivered me. He will deliver me in the future. But you also joining and helping is through your prayers, that thanks may be given by many persons on our behalf for the favor bestowed upon us through the prayers of many. He just says God's going to do what He's going to do, but He's going to do it in concert with your prayers. He doesn't want them for a moment to think he doesn't need them. He wants them to know that he does need them. And we do need to pray one for another. James tells us that the effectual righteous, the effectual fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much. God still moves through the prayers of his people. And so he pleaded with the people to pray on his behalf. I've been telling Asia for years, intercessory prayer is critical to the expression of God's great power. Don't pray for somebody else. Somebody else is going through something far greater than you are. And so the duty of prayer is not to magnify God's power, but to glorify it. You can't change God's plan. His will be done. We just need to get in line with his will. And so many prayers bring many thanks. Many prayers bring many thanks, and God works through those prayers. And Paul always knew that he never questioned the sovereign purpose of God. And he never questioned the participation of the believers in that work. And so the partnership or the participation is a participation of prayer as we pray for one another in all our trials. Tremendous comfort is given to us in this text. I mean, it fits perfectly for where we are at the moment. Can anything be more wonderful than to realize that God is a God of tender mercy and a God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our affliction, who comforts us so that we could comfort other. God who comforts us in the midst of whatever it is we're going through, our sufferings. God who will bring alongside some mutual sufferings we could share with. Even if we despair life, God can still raise us from the dead, and he will step in until the day he takes us to glory. And then the last great truth, he does it through the prayers of his people. And so when you pray for somebody else. Somebody thank God prayed for me. Yeah, songwriters that had me on their mind took the time to pray for me. And so I'll leave it this evening, Asia, and visiting friends, with this words from a hymn. It says, "Be still, my soul. The Lord is on my side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to God the order and provide. In every change, he's faithful, he will remain. Be still, my soul. Thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways lead to a joyful end. Be still, my soul. God will do the unbelievable. He will guide us as he has in the past. Your hope, your confidence, let nothing shake it. All your mysteries shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul. The waves and the wind, they still know his voice, who ruled them while he dwelt below. Be still, my soul. The hour is fast approaching, when we shall be forever with the Lord. And so when disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrows forgotten, love, joy will be restored. Be still, my soul. When change and tears are past, all safe and blessed, we shall meet at last. God bless you, Asia. Good night. See you on Sunday morning.